bringing people together. That's what Los Angeles should be about.
I've always focused on trying to lift up people who are vulnerable, to try to stand up for folks who are being ripped off, and to make the world better. As a lawyer, I've had a lot of opportunities in my life to do that kind of work. Those values really led me to want to be the city attorney so I could take the ideals of pursuing justice to the level of being able to represent the entire city of Los Angeles. I was very proud of our work in the Wells Fargo case that transformed banking forever, where we targeted Wells Fargo in the fake account scandal. In the pandemic, our office was, I think, the most impactful public law office in the United States in combating fake tests and preventions and cures, price gouging, a whole array of matters that we brought to the fore that really protected public health. I'm very proud of our leadership on gun violence prevention, both here and nationally. I was the co-founder and co-chair of Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, the first ever national coalition of prosecutors focused on combating gun violence. Spoken at the White House. We worked across the nation to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers and grapple with the issue of ghost guns. I'm really proud of our criminal justice reform work, where we've been able to take a look at how we can transform the lives of offenders and reduce repeat offenses. I never thought, when I ran for city attorney, that we would be at odds with the federal government. But that's in fact where we found ourselves when the Trump administration first took office. When the Muslim travel ban first took effect. It was a Saturday evening, and I realized that around the country there was havoc at airports, and at our airport, at LAX. And I didn't know what exactly my plan would be, but I knew I had to go to the airport where people, because of their religion, were being detained, because it felt like our country was slipping away. I wanted to speak to the top Trump official who was in charge of that effort, and he wouldn't talk to me. I said to him, I want to see the detainees. He said, you can't do that. How many are there? Not at liberty to say. Where are they? I can't tell you. I've never been so angry in my professional life. But the next morning, just a few hours later, we had a number of lawyers in my office prepared to sue the Trump administration. We were active again and again. We won a very important lawsuit that prevented the Trump administration from forcing LAPD to be complicit in civil immigration enforcement. We were active in trying to preserve the DACA program, the Temporary Protective Status program. We were one of the key litigants in the census litigation when the Trump administration tried to make the census as ineffective as possible because it knew that it would diminish LA's political representation and resources if they were to prevail. On just so many different levels, I think our office has been a force for good in Los Angeles, and that's why I ran for city attorney in the first place.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Feuer and the Honorable Gail Ruderman Feuer.
Thank you so much. Gail really appreciated that applause. That was very nice. So, she often gets that when she walks into a room in our house, so it's just like being at home. I want to begin by thanking you for the privilege of serving as your city attorney. It's been nearly a decade. I want to say thanks to our exceptional team in our office. Hardworking, dedicated professionals, attorneys, law clerks, secretaries, investigators, paralegals, administrators, folks who are engaged in the daily work of victims assistance, just a whole range of incredible work each of you has made this work incredibly rewarding. I want to thank my colleagues in LA City government, LA County government, at the state and federal levels, elected and appointed officials, department staff, all for your collaboration and for your commitment to the people we serve. I want to say thanks to our friends at Channel 35, LA City View, who have been such great partners in communicating important messages to the public. And congratulations to all the newly elected officials in Los Angeles, who next week will take the reins and help lead us into the future. Of course, I want to thank the person you applauded, my wife, Justice Gail Ruderman Feuer, for a lifetime of love and support. It's been nearly 40 years, which for at least half our staff actually is a lifetime, so I get it. While public service can be incredibly challenging, there's no career like it. You get to awaken in the morning and say, I gotta chart a path for the day. What crisis can we solve? What burden can we lift? What suffering can we help alleviate? How can I propel the next idea forward? Who can we inspire? What justice can we bring into the world? How can we change the world? It's an urgent life, an intense life, a life in which to burn very brightly. This moment, right now, is the moment. It will never come again. How many of us get to live a life like that? Many of you will remember that my dad was a prisoner of war to the Nazis in World War II, and that he barely survived that experience, including the march from Stalag 17 as the war was coming to a conclusion. He'd resisted the calls from his buddies to carry him because when his plane was shot down, the injuries he'd suffered made it almost impossible for him to walk. But when he and his fellow POWs did survive and were liberated, my dad committed to doing the most important work in the world. Not the most lucrative, the most important work in the world. And for my dad, who had seen the horrors of war, that work was educating children, which he did for 60 years. When I was a teenager, my dad made sure that my mission would be to find for myself the most important work in the world, for me. And I soon discovered what that work was. It was standing up for people in need. It was fighting for the underdog. It was seeking justice. And I've been very fortunate in my life to be able to pursue that mission again and again. As the director of Bethsedec Legal Services, on the city council, in the state legislature, and as city attorney. I intend to continue to live my life that way. My work so far has been a good prologue, and I'm just getting started. We'll talk more about that in a second. The job of city attorney is about as complex as it gets. Our office writes all the laws in the city. We advise the mayor and the city council and all the commissions and agencies and departments in the city on everything that has a legal dimension to it. And that means our office is involved in pretty much everything that matters in Los Angeles. We defend the city when the city is sued. When the city's made a mistake, we try to find a just resolution for the victim and for the taxpayer. We might work to spur reforms in how the city does business. Or when the city hasn't erred or the plaintiff's demand is unreasonable, then we fight. We also sue to right wrongs. When workers' wages are stolen, when patients are mistreated, when consumers are victims of scams, when neighborhoods endure environmental justice, when kids or seniors are suffering. and we're one of the largest prosecutors' offices in the world. We contend with sex abuse of kids, gun violence, drunk driving, elder abuse, domestic violence, and a wide array of nonviolent offenses that affect daily quality of life and public safety. It is a gigantic undertaking. Since I've been elected, we've had well over 350,000 cases and written thousands of laws. As a candidate 10 years ago, I said I wanted this to become the best public law office in the United States. When I arrived, I quickly learned that getting there would be an enormous challenge. The office was emerging from furloughs. Many major units were severely understaffed, and morale was low. But thanks to our remarkable staff, just a few years later, in 2017, the American Bar Association conferred its top award in the nation for a public sector law firm on us. It's the only time in the history of this country that a city attorney's office has received that award. And we have, in fact, accomplished amazing things together. We focused on improving safety and quality of life in LA's neighborhoods, tripling our very successful problem-solving neighborhood prosecutor program, creating a neighborhood school safety program, establishing our restorative neighborhood justice program, and going after more properties than ever that are the source of guns or gangs or drugs in neighborhoods that are crying out for our help through our citywide nuisance abatement program. Our office has taken extraordinary steps on criminal justice reform, making LA safer by reducing repeat offenses, by respecting victims, and in thousands of cases, by turning the lives of offenders around. For example, that neighborhood justice program I just mentioned, we started it in 2014 with a Smart Justice grant from the Obama administration. Thousands have gone through that program with only a 5% recidivism rate. Now other cities across the nation are seeking to replicate it. On homelessness, we've successfully sued one medical provider after another for unlawfully discharging homeless patients. I said on the air to one TV anchor one day that we should change the vocabulary we use when we talk about homeless patient dumping. I said, what if instead of saying a homeless woman in hospital garb was found late at night on our streets, we said, my mother was found on the street wearing only hospital garb. If that was how we talked about it, wouldn't we do everything we possibly could to prevent her or anyone else from ever having that happen to them? We have all got to go way beyond our traditional roles when it comes to grappling with the homelessness crisis. So our office won a grant to take over the county's homeless court program and created our HEART program, committing to thousands of people experiencing homelessness. We will eliminate outstanding fines and citations and warrants that are impeding you from getting a job or a place to live or basic services in exchange for you connecting with services to lift you out of homelessness. And we made those connections again and again and again. We established our LA Door program, sending teams including a nurse, a mental health expert, a substance abuse expert, and a formerly incarcerated caseworker to the streets to intervene with people experiencing homelessness before they commit an offense. I was with LA Door early one morning at a very gritty encampment, and a woman emerged from her tent and turned to her LA Door worker and said, "Oh, I know who you guys are. You're the ones who actually help people." Pretty good. And early on in my administration, our office led the initial City Hall efforts to convert motels, existing infrastructure that doesn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit to build, into homeless housing with needed services. From day one, I envisioned that our office would be a national leader in preventing gun violence. When I became city attorney, I reached out to the district attorney of Manhattan, Cyrus Vance Jr., and said, let's work together to create the nation's first ever coalition of prosecutors focused on reducing gun violence. And together, we founded Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, and then dozens and dozens of the leading prosecutors in the United States joined us. And we had the opportunity to lead that organization for 7 years. With the Coalition for Risk-Based Firearms Policy, we drafted a blueprint for how every state in the nation could get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. That's so important because, as you probably know, when there's a gun in the equation, the spouse is 500% more likely to be killed. The Obama administration posted recommendations like those on its social media. And then I was very honored when I was asked to speak at the White House to mayors and governors and lawmakers from across the United States about how local leaders can be effective when Congress was slow to act. Our office created a system that has disarmed more than 1,100 domestic abusers in Los Angeles. Think how many lives that saved. We've led efforts to require handguns be stored safely after kids have brought their adults' guns to school. And we prosecuted people who've tried to buy weapons when they're prohibited from doing so. In the wake of the Parkland tragedy, we convened a blue ribbon panel on school safety here in Los Angeles, holding hearings across the region and issuing key recommendations to the school district that it has been enacting to address the debilitating impact on kids' brains from the trauma that is posed by just by being exposed to gun violence. We created a program that has captured national attention to provide immediate therapy to those kids and their families and educate schools and parents. We've also been in the forefront of standing up for people who have been vulnerable and victimized. A chief of staff to a former U.S. senator told me that it used to be that San Francisco was thought of as the leading national expert on those issues. And now, he said, it's us. It's us. We changed banking forever through our lawsuit against Wells Fargo over fake accounts. When we first sued, one newspaper editorialized that, a city attorney shouldn't worry ourselves over the business practices of one of the leading banks in the United States. But by the time we were done, we had spurred sweeping reforms, and the United States Senate Banking Committee called on us to testify on Capitol Hill. We protected immigrant home health care workers and car wash workers when unscrupulous business owners stole their wages. We got a major prenatal vitamin manufacturer to reformulate its vitamins so pregnant moms wouldn't put their babies at risk. We sued vaping companies over marketing to kids and got them to change their practices. And with unserialized, untraceable ghost guns emerging as the weapon of choice for criminals, our office took on the nation's leading manufacturer and distributor of ghost gun parts and kits. And we led the way on environmental justice, with groundbreaking litigation against Southern California Gas over the largest methane leak in California history. We sued to protect an underserved neighborhood from dangerous practices by an oil production facility. We've gone after a metal recycling facility over metal shards flying over the fence of the school immediately adjacent to it. And we sued a major chemical manufacturer over cancer-causing chemicals in our waterways. And when the COVID pandemic exploded, there has been no law office in the United States that has been as impactful as ours has been, targeting successfully fake tests and preventions and cures, and prosecuting instances of price gouging of essential items. Our office has made a national impact in so many ways. But for example, when the right of LGBTQ couples to marry was on the line. Our office wrote the brief on behalf of 226 cities and counties across the nation, the Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, all in support of marriage equality in the United States Supreme Court. I decided to run for this job because this office can and must be a major force for good in our city, in our state, and in our nation. But I never thought that we'd find ourselves taking on the federal government. But that's just what happened when the Trump administration took office. The former president and his administration threatened our most basic values. When the Muslim travel ban took effect, it felt like our nation was slipping away. I was unsuccessful at LAX when I tried to get the detainees released one Saturday night. But the very next day, Sunday morning, the incredible response, from our staff, led to an avalanche of cases in which we played a leading role either as counsel, co-counsel, or friend of the court. We successfully sued to prevent the administration from conditioning public safety grants here in Los Angeles on making LAPD an arm of civil immigration enforcement. That would have made all Angelenos less safe. We led friend of the court efforts to stand up for the dreamers who are so dependent on DACA. We then fought for immigrants who were relying on the temporary protected status program. We were in the vanguard of challenging Trump's efforts to curtail the census and reduce California's political representation and precious resources, and we joined in fighting the former administration when it tried to roll back efforts to combat the climate crisis. And we stood up against hate. When the Trump administration, when the president himself said that there were good people on both sides in Charlottesville after white supremacists demanded Jews will not replace us, and when the former president called COVID Kung flu or the Chinese flu, igniting the fire of anti-Asian hate. I want to elaborate in a very personal way on that corrosive divisiveness and what it will take to bring us together again. There were very few Jewish people in San Bernardino when I grew up there. That led to some very interesting moments. I was 9 when the Six-Day War broke out, and my third grade teacher turned to the class and said, "Mike, would you please explain the Jewish perspective on the Mideast conflict to all the students?" Which I will concede I then proceeded to do. More things change, right? But other moments had a decidedly different cast to them. When a school vending machine didn't produce the correct change, I heard that machine Jewed you down. When my youngest brother wrote an editorial for the school newspaper against the idea that white supremacists should be able to use school property, a cross or something similar was burned on my family's front yard. And these experiences, of course, hardly can be compared to the suffering that's been endured by so many. But they did introduce me to what it feels like to be the other. So when racial violence erupted in my junior high school, I had to get involved to try to help de-escalate things and try to begin to find common ground. And that's been a mission of mine ever since. And that's why I have such a strong reaction to levels of hate that have scarred our nation. Homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hate, anti-Asian hate, misogyny, racism targeting African American and Latino residents. It's horrifying, and it's sickening. And of course, some of it recently hit all too close to home in this building. Who are we? Who are we, and what are we becoming? Was all this hate just festering beneath the surface, vulnerable to forces that unleashed it, and in too many cases have normalized it? Are we somehow destined to resort to the most vile stereotypes and prejudice? No. No. We have responsibilities here. We need to call out hate when we see it in the most forceful terms. But we also need to be willing to have some very uncomfortable exchanges, to have the guts and the judgment not to sit by silently. And no, I'm not just speaking about that recent conversation that was recorded that we've heard so much about. I'm talking about those unrecorded moments, those private moments where too often we let something slide, especially when our kids are listening. They, in particular, need to understand our ideals, our principles, and where we draw firm lines. We are their role models. We need to rise to this challenge like never before. Dialogues are fine, but they are insufficient. And we've got to go far beyond tolerating each other, which implies that there's something about the other person that we don't like, but we'll just have to learn to live with it. Our values should be much deeper. Mutual respect, appreciation, and understanding. We need to do a much better job of really listening to each other, even, or maybe especially, when we disagree with each other. And our actions need to lead us to connect authentically with folks from backgrounds different from our own, pursuing common projects and common purpose. That's true here in LA, where we tout our diversity but remain a very segregated city, and it's true across our nation. Now, there are glimmers of hope. I was heartened to see bipartisan support in Congress for legislation supporting marriage equality. I was heartened when at least some bipartisan voices denounced the former president's recent meeting with racists and anti-Semites. But I was all too aware of how many on Capitol Hill still oppose marriage equality, and the cowardly silence from too many officials in the aftermath of that appalling meeting between the former president and avowed bigots. That's just shameful. We need to marginalize, not legitimize, those who hate. This is the time for the most resonant voices among us to be the voices that rise and unify us, that lift each other up, that authentically make us recognize how much stronger we are when we stand and take action together. This challenge, and the ones posed by rampant homelessness and mass shootings, and the less reported daily gun violence that tears families apart, attacks on women's reproductive rights, assaults on our very democracy, economic inequality, and the existential threat that is posed by the climate crisis. These are our tests. Will we pass the test? It won't be long before our kids and our grandkids ask us, where were we? What did we really do when our city and our nation and our world needed our activism the most? What did we have the courage to sacrifice when the chips were really down? Don't we, each of us, want to point to our actions today and tomorrow and say in response, we hope we made you really proud? Speaking of challenges, I want to say congratulations. Has Heidi Feldstein Soto made it here today? Here she is, Heidi. So I want to say congratulations to you, and not that you need it, But I'll continue to do everything possible to ensure the transition between our administrations goes smoothly as you get off to the best possible start and make a cameo appearance on TV. It's just a good thing all the way around. Yeah. And I want to say to our group assembled today, City Attorney Feldstein Soto inherits a highly effective, dedicated, and accomplished team. Just as I brought my own ideas to this great office, so will she. And she'll make her own distinctive mark. I'd like us all to give a round of applause to the City Attorney-elect. As I conclude, a number of you have asked, what's next for me? So I know myself enough to know that my sense of purpose is deeply tied to making a troubled world better. I'm not built, unfortunately for Gail, to make a lot of money. I am built to serve others. And I'm going to be making a major announcement soon about what I hope my next step in service will be. It may involve a little competition. We'll see. I'm all in. But for today, with a lot of assistance from our office, I want to end with this point because I think it's so crucial as we turn pages and look into the future. With a lot of assistance from our office, I provided help to a woman experiencing homelessness on the street where Gail and I live. Just a little moment here, but her name is Anne. Anne told me that she was born and raised in Nigeria, that she was trained to practice law there, and that she had in fact practiced law in Texas. She'd gotten involved in a relationship. I assumed it was an abusive one. And she said one thing led to another, and I fled Texas, and I found my way, and here I am. And it's not as bad as you think it might be, she said. When I found Anne, she had a filthy blanket over her head to prevent others from seeing her, and I think from preventing her from having to engage with others, sitting on my street. And I just want to say, we helped, she got housed. And here's the thing. I'd given her my business card when we were interacting over the series of a number of occasions. And about 3 months after our last encounter, I got an email with the subject line, reactivation. This woman, who if you saw her on the street, what you would have seen is a lump with a blanket over it, had reactivated her Texas bar membership when she got housed. And she'd written to me saying, I'd like you to help me pass the California bar so I can help people just as I've been assisted. So I came home one day and I described all this to Gail. And Gail asked me, what would happen in LA if everyone committed to helping someone else? Let's start a just one person campaign. The needs in our city are so daunting, and meeting them can seem just overwhelming. So let's break it down for a second. What if each of us made the decision to help just one person in the year ahead? She might be a person experiencing homelessness. He might be a young man who's aging out of a broken foster care system. She might be a senior citizen who's just waiting for some simple connection to another human being. What if instead of being overwhelmed by our problems, each Angeleno helped just one person? That would transform our city. And that's the LA, and that's the nation I want to live in. Inspired, idealistic, engaged, hopeful. It's been an honor to help lead the pursuit of justice with you in our city. Thank you very much.